Liz Danes and Lorelai Gilmore. Both are teen moms from the world of Gilmore Girls, and they could not be more opposite in how they approach parenting. Hi, I'm Laura from Your Little Sisters Productions, and I love talking about characters and storytelling, and Gilmore Girls is one of my favorites to do that with. This is the fifth of my Gilmore Girls videos. Check out the others if you haven't already. And a quick shout out to our avatar artist, Lindsay Kay. Her Instagram handle will be in the description box below. Let's start with Liz. Growing up watching Gilmore Girls, I remember really liking Liz. She was quirky, although who isn't in Stars Hollow? She looked up to her big brother Luke, and she was working on turning her life around. I enjoyed seeing Liz become more stable in life, find happiness with TJ, and sell her jewelry at the Ren fairs. But one thing that has become harder and harder for me to ignore over the years has been how Liz's parenting, or lack thereof, affected Jess. When we hear about Jess for the first time, Luke talks about how his sister is sending him to Stars Hollow because she's in over her head and doesn't know what to do with him anymore. Luke also calls his sister a nutcase and seems to think that Jess getting away from her will be the best thing for him, showing us his views on the type of environment he believes his sister to have in her home. Through Jess's time on the show, and when Liz comes in later, we learn that she has been married multiple times and used to have a bit of a substance issue in the past. That, combined with how she treats TJ, her most stable and long lasting partner, during arguments, leads me to believe that Liz was even more unstable, dysregulated, and even negligent in earlier years when parenting Jess. Yes, Jess seems to have always had food, a roof over his head, and attend school when he felt like it. But other than that, I really don't see the Liz that she's described as being, spending a lot of time bonding, listening, or teaching emotional regulation, especially since she herself was unable to control her own emotions and impulses. She seemed to spend more time with men who were not good for her and doing her own thing rather than taking care of her son beyond keeping him alive. And by the time he's a teenager, he can pretty much do that on his own. In some ways, Jess had to grow up way too fast, but in other ways, this neglect left him very immature and developmentally behind, both emotionally and socially. Children of emotionally negligent parents often have trouble making and keeping healthy relationships with others and having a healthy sense of self worth. Being neglected by his parents, his father who abandoned him as a baby, and then his mother by prioritizing her boyfriends over him, I believe left Jess feeling as though he wasn't enough, which is a devastating feeling for anyone to have to go through. I think people are a little too harsh on Jess when he first arrives to Stars Hollow, especially the townspeople who knew Liz. I cringe every time I watch the scene where Lorelai tries to compare her upbringing with his and tries to bond with him over that because his parental issues and life experiences are so vastly different from hers, and yet she doesn't seem to see it that way. She had the misfortune of having overbearing and controlling parents. Jess had the misfortune to have no stable father figure and a barely stable mom who, instead of stepping up and helping her son, sends him away. Lorelai was also able to find a mother-like figure to help her and Rory out when she was 17. She was given a chance that she says she tried to give Jess, but never really does. One bad interaction with him and she's done. Her mind is made up, never to change again, even years later. And then, while Jess is living with Luke, Liz doesn't ever seem to call to check up on him, not even when he's on school break. It comes off as though, along with sending him away physically, she also sent away any cares for his well being or desire to talk to or see him. When the show introduces Liz, you can tell they want us to like her. She's fun, a little dependent on Luke, but adores him, makes pretty jewelry that people love, and she seems like a happy go lucky person, the complete opposite of Luke in many ways. She and Lorelai get along right away. In fact, Liz seems to get along with everyone right away. But on the other side, she also has screaming matches with TJ, and even throws items at him at least once. And she and TJ use Luke more often than not throughout their time on the show. So even though we are privy to seeing her erratic behavior and her dependence on Luke, the show seems to want to play her behavior off as comedic rather than the behavior of an unstable person. I don't want to make it seem as though I think she's a villain or a bad person, but I do want to make it clear that, especially before she comes on the show, she was not in a good place, and that put Jess in not a good place. So much of Jess's behavior and the issues he exhibits can be traced back to how he was raised. And just to make it clear, I'm not trying to excuse any of his bad behavior or say that how he acted in certain circumstances was okay just because he had a hard past. Understanding someone's behavior and issues does not excuse their behavior. But since Liz raises Jess off screen, I can really only go off what Jess and Luke say about her and Jess's behavior when analyzing Liz's parenting. Jess has almost no real communication skills when he first comes on the scene. He bottles up his feelings and lets them out through isolation and committing petty crimes, such as stealing the baseballs from the high school and a garden gnome, and outlining a fake crime in chalk outside of Dosie's just to be a punk. Luke and Rory seem to be the only two who are ever able to see the vulnerable side of Jess and try to understand what he's going through. He obviously has a very low sense of self worth, telling Luke that the girls he likes don't care about him, and telling Rory that he's not going to go to college. And when she asks why, he says, ask the people around him, including Rory's own mother, Lorelai. It reminds me a lot of the scene between Lorelai and Christopher, when he tells her that he never would have made it through Princeton, even if she hadn't gotten pregnant. And it just shows how having emotionally negligent parents can set a child up for a lifetime of low self worth and self image. Jess does think very low of himself at the beginning, and because of that, he doesn't really make an effort to try to be better for a long time. He just wants to get by on the bare minimum. He barely goes to school, choosing instead to start working a full time job, thinking he'll be able to skate by because he's smart enough to pass the tests. He keeps things from Rory and Luke, the people that he is closest to, because he lacks the communication and relational skills to know how to properly communicate his thoughts, feelings, and needs. He has very low emotional resilience or intelligence, at least not when he's 17. And a lot of that has to do with not having any stable, caring, or attentive parents or guardians before this. We are given every reason to believe that before living with Luke, Jess had no one to look out for him, put him first, talk through things with him, teach him, or be there for him the way a child growing up needs. Just like babies need physical touch to help their brains develop properly, children and teenagers need someone to be there for them and guide them through their adolescence. Without that positive attention, teenagers can often resort to doing more and more drastic things for attention. Negative attention feels better than no attention, after all. Jess eventually does not graduate high school and ends up running away to California and then later comes back to the East Coast, where he works at various jobs. He does eventually seem to straighten his life out, thanks to some help from Luke and a self help book, and writes his own book and gets into publishing, an apt career for an avid reader like himself. But as far as Liz is concerned and how she parented him, I think she prioritized men, substances, and her own wants above him. I think she was also unable to help him work through his emotions and learn how to communicate effectively. And I think she had a lot of outbursts of anger or frustration. I also believe there were periods of time when Jess was essentially on his own. Combine that with his dad being gone, I'm sure Jess felt abandoned by his parents, and that this negligence led to many of his behavioral issues. Thankfully, we know it turns out happy for him in the end, but it was a long journey to get there. Lorelai's parenting is opposite to Liz's in many respects. For one, she prioritizes Rory above all else in her life as often as she can. She tells Max she's never brought a guy home or introduced Rory to any of her boyfriends because she didn't want Rory to get her heart broken or her hopes up. She is also extremely involved in Rory's life, attending every school function she can and encouraging her dreams. Lorelai has an extremely positive view of Rory, always complimenting her to others as well as praising Rory to her face. The whole idea behind their relationship is that they are best friends first and mother and daughter second, with Lorelai being the childish, impulsive, outgoing one, and Rory the responsible, list-making, introverted one. This dynamic in their household puts a lot of pressure on Rory to stay the rational, mature one in the house and to feel as though she has to live up to her mom's expectations for her. It's been talked about several times over the years on the internet, but Rory seems to struggle with gifted child syndrome. She was told repeatedly growing up by many people that she was smart and special and good and was going to make it big someday, and she very rarely faced any criticism. When she is criticized, she tends to fall apart. It makes perfect sense why Lorelai parents Rory the way she does, with lots of compliments and encouragement and friendship above all else, because it's everything she felt was missing from how she herself was raised. And while she's also not afraid to call Rory out on certain behaviors, I do believe that taking the friends first approach to her parenting style actually dims the parental aspects of their relationship, almost causing Rory to not take her seriously when Lorelai does pull out the mom card. Like when Rory admits to having kissed Jess at Suki's wedding and now being jealous that he has a new girlfriend, even though she is still with Dean. Lorelai is very direct with her, telling her that what she's doing is wrong and she needs to make a choice rather than lead poor Dean on. But Rory, instead of following what she wants, goes with what she believes others want for her, what she thinks is the right thing to do based on others' perception of her. She stays with Dean while having strong feelings for Jess and being mean to his girlfriend Shane for no reason other than pure jealousy. But Rory does all this to try and keep her mom happy, and to try and fit in with the mold she has been shoved into from a very young age. I believe if she was honest about what she wanted and not afraid of upsetting her mom or the image that she holds of her, she would have gone for Jess a lot earlier. Lorelai also calls out Rory's misbehavior when she has an affair with Dean while he's married, letting Rory know in no uncertain terms that she was 100% in the wrong. It takes Rory some time to come to terms with her actions versus who she believes herself to be. A perfect angel that never really does anything wrong, as her mom in the town of Stars Hollow and even her grandparents like to treat her as. But Rory does eventually break things off with Dean. And then there are times when we very clearly see Rory not respecting Lorelai's parental authority, since she's so used to the friendship dynamic instead. Like the time when they discover termites are eating away at their house, and Rory suggests going to her grandparents for help, but Lorelai very firmly puts her foot down and says no. Rory goes behind her back and does it anyway. Or, in the very first episode, Rory decides she doesn't want to go to Chilton anymore because she met Dean, and Lorelai lets her know no matter what, she will be there on Monday. And yet Rory stays opposed to going until she overhears her mom is borrowing money from Emily and Richard to pay for her tuition, which she knows puts her mom in a very difficult position. So she finally consents to go. Lorelai wants Rory to have everything she never did, which is completely understandable, but I don't think she sees the amount of pressure that she has put on Rory to remain this golden child and achieve these grand things, like getting an Ivy League school education, or being not just a journalist, but a foreign correspondent journalist. Very lofty ambitions for anyone to have. And when Rory does make a mistake or keeps something from Lorelai, Lorelai always acts so shocked that Rory would do that because she thinks them being best friends first means her daughter will never lie or hide things from her. Lorelai is like those parents who, when you tell them their kid did something less than perfect, says, "No, not my kid." And when Rory does get into trouble, she often, but not always, believes that it's because of someone else. Like when Rory's wrist gets fractured and she tells her mom that she was the one who let Jess drive and told him to keep driving, Lorelai refuses to acknowledge any responsibility on Rory's part in the accident. Or when Rory steals a yacht and Lorelai goes really easy on her kid who just committed a felony because someone hurt her feelings and criticized her, and she had no other method of getting through her feelings. It must have been Logan's idea. Logan's dad was mean to Rory, etc. No talk to Rory about how she should have been able to handle her feelings without committing a crime. Just blame being tossed onto other people because no way Rory could do something like that without others interfering. She's the perfect golden child in Lorelai's eyes. Now, on to what I think is one of Lorelai's biggest parenting mistakes she makes on the show. Lorelai losing contact with Rory after she drops out of Yale. I understand that she is hurt that Rory went behind her back to her grandparents and that she feels as though Rory is throwing her life and opportunities away. But I don't think that not talking to her or seeing her was the best approach. She essentially leaves Rory to the wolves, those wolves being her grandparents' influence and Rory's own internal struggle with her identity at this time. a struggle that she might not have had in the first place if she had been better prepared for the realities of the world and the criticism she would face going into journalism as she aspired to do. During the time that we see Rory living with Emily and Richard, we never see Rory holding or reading a book. She's not even able to answer her grandfather when he asks her what she's been reading lately. And she starts getting used to the life of functions, fundraisers, teas, and putting her amazing organizational skills to use in planning events for the DAR. She also spends a lot of time with Logan and his friends out partying, drinking, and getting into general mayhem. Rory is going through a lot of emotions at this time. She had her dreams crushed by someone she really respected and looked up to. She committed a felony crime, and she dropped out of Yale entirely with no plans to go back or pursue another career that we see. That is, not until Jess shows up. I believe one of the reasons Jess was able to knock some sense into Rory at this time is because she was so distant from everything her life used to be. She's around others that are in the same environment as her, so she doesn't realize just how far she has strayed. She's living with her grandparents in a room that doesn't match her style. She has maids attend to her every need. She has a boyfriend with money to burn and a blatant disregard for the law. That's a far cry from her humble beginnings, living in a garden shed with her mom as a young child. Jess reminds Rory of who she really is and where she came from. Her love of reading and learning, of following rules, and her desire to have a career in writing. I think that if Lorelai had been open to having contact with Rory throughout this time, Rory might have been able to come back to her own sense of self a bit earlier. Instead, Lorelai lets her be, believing that this is something she needs to do all on her own without any help, because that's how Lorelai believes people get through difficult things. After all, she raised Rory on her own, found a job and worked her way up, went to business school all on her own. She left Christopher alone, believing that that was what needed to happen for him to come to his senses, which he never 100% does, but that's besides the point. Lorelai doesn't see that by being out of Rory's life, she is taking away a reminder of who Rory really is, what she has always aspired to be. And unfortunately, Lorelai believes she's proven right when she gets the phone call from Rory that she's moved out of the grandparents' house and signed back up at Yale, because we never see Rory telling her about how it was Jess that gave her her wake-up call. Could someone else have helped Rory come back to her sense of self? Maybe, but it took Jess, who has never been afraid of telling Rory what he thinks, to come in like a blast from the past and give her that push for her to realize just how far she has strayed from who she wants to be. Even with all of that, I do believe that Lorelai is overall a good mom. She doesn't put Rory down or squash her dreams. She takes care of all her needs and she genuinely loves and is there for her. And yes, she makes mistakes, just like everyone does, because she's human and that's what we do. But she really did try her best and beyond to raise Rory and give her everything she never had. And yes, sometimes she was a bit too lenient and maybe even naive at times about things, but no one can say that Lorelai didn't sacrifice everything for her kid. She gave up so much just to make sure that Rory was safe and taken care of and shielded. She even, if begrudgingly, accepts Rory's closeness with Emily and Richard over the years, even encouraging it at times, even if she didn't fully understand or like it. You can clearly see the difference in Rory and Jess when they were teenagers, and how their being raised affected them and influenced their behaviors and their beliefs about themselves. And while Jess turns out well in the end, Rory struggles quite a bit, especially in A Year of the Life series, showing that it's not just how you're raised that predates success, but rather your own personal choices. If you liked this video and you want to see more like this, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe for future video essays on various movies and TV shows. We have channel memberships available, as well as a Patreon if you would like to help support our channel that way. Check out our original audio drama serial, The Adventures of the Dragonborn, over here on our YouTube channel. It was written by Taya and myself and performed by some truly incredible voice actors. Be sure to check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.